Okay, so my name is Kelemen, and what I thought I'd do today with you is something personal. Personal, a drop of theological, but mainly personal. So like this, I was not raised in an Orthodox environment. I encountered this for the first time when I was in my 20s. And I think any intelligent individual, when they first trip into what is a foreign culture, and this is a foreign culture, will notice certain things that are, I don't think it's too strong a word, just bizarre. As I thought I would share some of those things that I found to be bizarre. I actually have a very long list, but I'm not going to go through all of them because that would take many hours. But I'm just going to go through like my top 3 things that I think are very strange about Orthodox culture. And what I'll do is I'm going to tell you how I process through those things. Now I'm not so naive as to believe that you're just like me and therefore you'll have the same things that bother you and that you'll process through it the same way. But what I'm hoping is that when you look at the example of how one person dealt with what he found very foreign and very bizarre, so it might inspire you in your process, however you do it, to deal with those things which you find to be unusual. So without further ado, I'm just going to give you my top 3, yeah? My first is like this. You cannot drop into the world of Orthodox Jews and not notice, I don't think this is too strong a word, their literal obsession with tiny itsy bitsy little detail. Okay, now when I say tiny itsy bitsy little detail, I mean in the extreme. For example, the home that I grew up in America was traditional. So we had a concept of a Sabbath, and I remember every Friday night, my mother would light Sabbath candles, and then we would go out for Chinese food, yes? So we had a concept of the Sabbath. If you would ask my parents, when does the Sabbath start? In those days, they would have told you, it starts at sunset, right? And when does it end? It ends at sunset. That's what they would have told you, sunset to sunset. Friday night to Saturday night, that's what they would have said. Okay, now, you walk out into the streets here, and you ask one of these ultra-Orthodox Jews, when does the Sabbath start? And you know what they're going to tell you. They're going to say, well, it starts at 7:14 and 11 seconds on this side of Har Nof. But if you go to the other side of Har Nof, it's 7:14 and 17 seconds. And they're not kidding. And when does the Sabbath end? It ends at, right, 8:21 and 19 seconds. And they really think that that's the way that God thinks. Now, when I hear that, what occurs to me is, have they gone over the line and are they obsessing over picky and itsy little details that are man-made? And do you really think that the master of the universe is sitting around with a stopwatch saying 8:14 and 11 seconds? I mean, come on. Do you really think that's where spirituality is in those 11 seconds? Okay. The first thing that bothered me very, very much was their literal obsession with detail. And I could give you many, many examples of this. I remember, I'll tell you here, although I'm still criticizing for their obsession, bless you, with detail, but I'll tell you an example which I admire a bit. When I first encountered Orthodoxy, I had been a vegetarian for about 7 years. And I was a vegetarian for about 7 years, and then I stopped. A few years after I became religious, I stopped being a vegetarian. And then I was not a vegetarian for like 20 years. And then again, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, I started being a vegetarian again. It's a very interesting reason why I stopped, and then why I started again. That's a different story. But nonetheless, at the time when I was a vegetarian, I used to teach high school. And I would take my high school students once a year down. I was teaching in Los Angeles. I took them to the largest slaughterhouse in Los Angeles, the slaughterhouse that provides most of McDonald's meat in Los Angeles. And I took them there so they could see exactly how the animal's killed. Now, I'm not going to describe it to you in great detail. They use a technique in Los Angeles called the bolt shot, right? The bolt shot is essentially a giant steel ball that's connected to a wire that's lodged in a hydraulic gun. And the ball fires several times a second, and there's an animal that gets pushed up into a corner, and the ball just rips apart the animal's head until eventually the animal is hemorrhaging so badly from his head that he drops. The people who then come in with the chainsaws to cut the animal to pieces are cutting the animal to pieces while it's alive. Yeah, the animal's not dead. It's a terrible, terrible procedure. And when I would take my students, invariably, they would see some value in vegetarianism afterwards, okay, which was my intention. Now, what I found interesting was, at the same time that I was taking my students to see how non-Jewish meat is killed, I tripped into a study of kashrut, of the Jewish laws, Jewish dietary laws, and shchita, the laws of slaughtering animals. Okay, now, it is certainly possible to abuse an animal that's going to be slaughtered kosher. However, the kosher slaughtering procedure is one of the only procedures known to mankind that is entirely painless, and I'll describe to you exactly why. They take a knife, a giant knife, and the knife has to be sharper than any surgical instrument. You've ever gotten a paper cut where you slid your finger and you didn't even realize it was cut until afterwards? Well, that's what this knife has to be like. If there's a nick anywhere in the knife, it cannot be used, and if it is used, the animal's not kosher. This knife is moved across the animal's throat in one continuous motion. If the person who's killing the animal this way stops part way and then continues, so the animal is not kosher. It might have felt the stop and the start again. Okay? It has to be one continuous stroke, exactly like a paper cut. By the way, they check the knife again afterwards to see if maybe there was a nick and it was missed. And if afterwards they find there was a nick in the knife, the animal's not kosher. They give it to non-Jews, but the Orthodox Jews will not touch it. Okay. When they actually make this incision, they have to make it 50%, 50.00% of the way through the main tubes going up through the animal's throat. Okay, now, if it's 49.999% of the way through one of those tubes, what happens to the animal? The animal is not kosher. They take it to give it to non-Jews. Okay, now, initially this bothered me. Are you telling me that if they make the incision 49.99999% of the way through those two tubes, the animal felt pain, but at 50% it didn't feel pain? By the way, I have to tell you, it is physiologically impossible for an animal to feel pain from the kosher slaughtering procedure. It cannot happen. It's impossible to feel pain. Why? Because when you sever those two tubes, the blood falls out of the brain. There's no pressure to keep the blood in the brain. So what happens is, before the pain impulse can ever move from the throat into the spine and then up into the brain is already numb. In fact, because they tried to ban kosher slaughtering in Europe, they did these EEG tests where they actually connect the brain of the animal to an electroencephalogram, and they monitor brain activity. Now, of course, when they monitor brain activity on an animal that's being killed through the standard non-Jewish procedure of bolt shot, there is an earthquake, there's a volcano going off inside the cow's head. But when the animal is being killed kosher, the EEG goes from a normal EEG to completely flat instantaneously, because it is impossible for the animal to feel pain. The only method that they know that causes as little pain to an animal as kosher slaughtering is if you drug the animal, if you anesthetize the animal. But if you anesthetize the animal, you can't eat the meat, because metabolism stops at the moment when the animal dies and the drug remains trapped in the animal's meat. So if you want to eat the meat, the only method known to mankind that can actually produce a painless death for that animal is kosher slaughtering. So I had tremendous admiration for kosher slaughtering, but come on, are you telling me that if you sliced it 49.99999% of the way through those tubes, the animal felt pain? The blood still fell out of the brain. It was a flat EEG, I can show it to you. So it's just an obsession with the tail. They become so involved in the trees that they miss the forest. Right? Are you telling me that God cares about 49.99999%? Or how about this? Did anyone tell you that Orthodox Jews put on their right shoe before their left shoe? Have you heard this? And they tie their left shoe before their right shoe, unless you're a woman, in which case you might tie your right shoe before your left shoe, depending. Yeah? Do you know there's an order in which they cut their fingernails? Yeah? That. Yeah? They're not kidding. Now, do you think that's what God cares about? I mean, come on. It's a life for someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder. Yeah? That's what it looks like. Okay? The first thing that bothered me so much was, why such an obsession with picky, itsy, little tiny bitty details? What is going on here? Okay. I'll show you how I process through that question, but just put it on the side for a minute. Okay, let's deal with another issue that bothers me very much. My first exposure to Orthodox Jews was through an academic project. I was doing my senior thesis in college, and I went into a yeshiva to interview people. And I had to be in the yeshiva for about a week doing these interviews. And while I was there, I asked the rabbi, would you mind if I participated in some of the classes? And he said no. He gave me a volume of the Talmud, which I couldn't read because I didn't read Hebrew, or Aramaic, or Old French. And they gave me, at the time, I was this hotshot university student from a very fine university, but I didn't read any of the language, so they gave me a high school student to come and translate everything for me. And this high school student shadowed me, followed me around the yeshiva everywhere I went, made sure I didn't get into trouble, and translated everything. Fine. So they told me the schedule. The schedule was at 7:30 in the morning they had prayers, which of course I don't go to because I'm not religious. Yeah. Then at 8:30 they had breakfast, which was very interesting to me. And then at 9 o'clock they had Talmud study, which I really wanted to go to. And I would come at 9 o'clock and the classes would go from 9 to 1. My first day I go in, get breakfast, 9 o'clock I'm in there. We're learning Talmud, one of the most exciting things I've ever done in my life. Really amazing. I was a lit major. We read 1,000 pages a week for 4 years. Yeah. So I read everything that was to be read in the English language. And I never saw anything with the depth and beauty of Talmud ever in my life. So I was blown away. First day, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Time is flying past. I'm having such a good time. 12 o'clock. Before I know it, it's 1 o'clock. Everyone closes their giant folio size volumes. They put them down. And before I get a chance to get up from my chair, this man with a long black coat and a big black hat walked up to the front of the room. There's a podium up in the front of the room. He gives a bang on the podium. Everyone jumps up, grabs a book, and starts going, so I had no idea what was going on. I just grabbed a book. I was probably holding it upside down because I didn't read Hebrew. I have no idea until today what I grabbed, right? And I started going, right? When in Rome. Okay, so then suddenly everyone goes quiet, and I went, oh, okay. Now they're all going, extremely uncomfortable situation. I've got my book, I'm whispering, I'm going, right? Trying to figure out what's happening here, right? 15 minutes later, there's again loud singing, and the whole thing ends. And I realized I have to make a strategic decision. If I don't want to go through this again, I've got to get up in the middle of the class at like 5 to 1 or 10 to 1 and bolt. And if I'm not going to do that, then I'm going to end up in the middle of these prayers every day. So I try to be open-minded, and I thought, okay, maybe I can learn something from this. So what I did was, I'm definitely not going to learn from some book which I can't read. So I went down to the local Orthodox bookstore, and I said to the guy, listen, I need an English copy of that Orthodox prayer book they're using. Do you have such a thing? And he says, as a matter of fact, they just published the first volume ever of a tiny little English Hebrew prayer book. He said it's brand new. It's supposed to be a great translation. I remember the thing was called the Art Scroll Sidur. It had just come out, right? Only paperback this big. And I bought this little paperback book, and I read it, and the translation was beautiful, eloquent, and the commentary was very fascinating. It was challenging. So that's what I decided I'm going to do. So every day from that point forward, when they would start praying, I would get out my English Hebrew prayer book, and I would stand there, and I would just read. And it was very interesting, and I would just pore over the commentaries. Okay. That went on for about a week, after which my high school student, my shadow, walked up to me after prayers. And he comes up to me and he says, Kelemen, you don't pray right. I said, excuse me. He says, no, I've been watching you. You don't pray right. I said, well, what did you have in mind? He says, you got to say the words. So I couldn't believe where I thought this was going. And I said to him, what do you mean I got to say the words? The God who you believe in doesn't know what's in my heart? So the poor kid got all flustered and he just ran away. Okay, but don't feel bad for him. He comes back a minute later and he's got this giant folio-sized book, which he slams down the table and he starts pointing at it saying, it says here you got to say the words. And he was making such a scene. At that point, the rabbi saw what was happening. They came, they carried him off, they grabbed him. Yeah, and that was it. However, it was too late. He had already confessed. These Orthodox Jews think if you didn't say the words, you didn't pray. Okay, now, come on, right? What kind of a God do they believe in who doesn't know what's in your heart? I mean, I always thought that Orthodoxy came into the world in the first place to talk about this great, omniscient, omnipotent, non-physical being. And yet, the Orthodox Jews think that if you don't say it, he can't hear it? What kind of a God is that? Question number one, why such an obsession with detail? Question number two, why do they think you have to say the words? Question number three. I had been educated at UCLA and at Harvard. And I thought academic. I spoke academic, which created a massive cultural chasm between me and the people in this yeshiva. They were all from an English-speaking country. And the nouns that they used or I should say the connecting terms in a sentence were often English. But every other word was some other language, and altogether I called the dialect yeshivish. Yeah, it was not something that I could possibly comprehend, except for one person in the building. There was a rabbi there, a brilliant man, who I love very much and I admire him until today. He could speak yeshivish and Harvard. He was bilingual. And what I discovered was, he was a very hard person to get to because everyone wanted to talk to him. And so when I wanted to speak to him, I had to stand in line behind 5 or 6 people, which meant I was going to stand there for half an hour, 45 minutes in the morning just to ask him one question. But what I discovered was that he would eat breakfast in the yeshiva at 8:30. So at 8:30, when he would eat breakfast there, I would always grab a seat, sit right across from him, and I would pummel him with my questions, right? And I think probably all my questions had essentially the same format, which is, Rabbi, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? And when I asked these questions, he would serve up an intellectual feast. I'm talking about like when he spoke, the breadth, the depth, the relevance, right? The beauty of his words. And I was just mesmerized. And when I got up from that breakfast every morning, I felt like I had eaten a giant feast, an intellectual feast. It was just the most amazing experience. For a couple of weeks. But then, one morning, I asked one of my questions. I actually don't remember what I asked because it was 30 years ago. And I wish I remembered, but I'm sure it was one of my usual questions like, why do we have to do this or why do we have to do that? And this rabbi, who I think liked me, leaned across the table with a big smile, and he said to me, Kelemen, you keep asking the wrong questions. At which point, I was very suspicious and all my radar went up. And I said, what do you mean? And he said to me, Kelemen, you keep asking, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? He said, with a big smile, don't you realize? He said, our theme song, our mantra is, and then he mumbled some Hebrew words, Naseh v'nishma. And he translated for me. We do it, even if we don't understand it. And I thought, you're a kook. Okay, now, I was not surprised that if you scratch an Orthodox Jew, you find a religious fanatic underneath. I think all along I suspected that was the case. What bothered me was, I'm a pretty good judge of people. I was certain that he got me. But if he understood that I was UCLA and Harvard, why would he ever confess in front of me? Even if he believed it, why would he ever confess in front of me? We do it even if we don't understand it. Didn't he realize in that moment I was going to lose complete respect for him? Why did he say that? Why such an obsession with details? Why do they think you have to say the words? And why would any Orthodox Jew be proud of the fact that they do it even if they don't understand it? Okay, now, fast forward this whole movie about 10 years. I had found enough of value in the Orthodox community that I had actually pursued a Jewish education. I had come here to Israel. I had gone to yeshiva. And while I was in yeshiva, I heard about an amazing man who was teaching here in Jerusalem. His name was Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was a great, great man. And this man was giving public classes to the people who lived here in Yerushalayim. And I heard they were very dramatic, very interesting, and I decided to go one night. And I remember when I was standing outside of the room where he gave the class, someone warned me, it's going to be very crowded, just try to get a spot against the wall. And when I got pushed into the room by this flood of people that were behind me, I looked and there was no spaces on the wall. So I remember I was just standing there, I didn't know exactly where to go, and someone saw that I was confused, and they grabbed me and they put me on somebody else's feet who was standing against the wall. Yeah, so I felt bad standing on his feet until someone came and stood on my feet. Okay, right. I remember I could see the rabbi underneath someone's earlobe and behind someone's nostril. And the rabbi got up off of his bench and he went and he sat on this stool and he started to speak. And his talk that night shook me to the core. He was speaking on a theme that he'd been addressing that entire winter. And his theme was that the entire Torah, all of the mitzvahs, every single commandment is there to polish and to craft a human personality that will be expert at intimacy. at closeness, at connection. So all of the Orthodox Jews who were sitting in that room just took it in stride, and they were listening and taking notes. And I was thinking, what on earth is he talking about? Now, I wish I would have recorded the lecture, because if I could just play you the lecture, you'd be tremendously moved by it. Unfortunately, I didn't record it. However, I can describe to you what happened inside of me that night as a result of hearing that lecture. I've been doing marriage counseling now for more than 20 years. I should say couple counseling, because many of the people who come to me are not married yet. And I've discovered something very interesting. Probably 95% of the couples that come to me are coming because their relationship is on the rocks. There's something terribly wrong. Okay. Now, I've counseled dozens, perhaps at this point hundreds of couples. I have never once had a couple come to me where their relationship was in trouble because of some disagreement over a major philosophical or political issue. It has never happened. Invariably, when people come to talk to me, the difficulties that they're having are over the silliest, most picayune, tiny little details. I'll give you an example. I had a couple come to me. I consider myself to be a very healthy person. He was a health nut. He would never consume any sugar, any refined sugar of any sort. He felt that sugar was as poisonous as cyanide. And they had kids, they had a bunch of kids, and he was opposed to allowing his children at any time to have any exposure to sugar, okay? She, on the other hand, grew up in this very warm home where whenever they wanted to have a fun time with the kids, they would feed them sugar. So sugary treats. So there was this conflict in their relationship, and what happened was, at a certain point, he asked her and asked her and asked her. At a certain point, he blew a fuse, and he said to her, "Lady, if you continue poisoning my children, I am going to divorce you." So she was shocked. And she said, "I didn't realize it was that serious of an issue, and I promise you I will not do that again." And everything was great for a few months, and then, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, he caught her smuggling into the house Cheerios. And that was it, okay? So they ended up in my office getting a divorce over Cheerios. Yes, you're correct. Yes? Okay, so now you hear this and you think, right, that he's insane and she's a sadist, yeah? Like, what on earth is going on here? But if you sat in my office, you would hear story after story after story like this. I've had people who came into my office saying the relationship could not work because they disagreed over air conditioning temperatures. I'm not kidding, yeah? Now, this sounds crazy to you. Think back about your last relationship. Think about what it broke up over. Now, I know you're going to say no, but it was a much larger issue behind that. But the reality is the thing that broke up over, or we were having difficulty over, was some picayune, itsy-bitsy little tiny detail. Something silly that someone, an outsider would say, "You're kidding. You're breaking up a relationship over that?" And the inverse, I've discovered, is also true. When people have relationships that thrive, it's very rarely because they got the big things right. The big things you have to get right. But when someone's relationship is really flying, it's usually because of the small things. I'll give you an example of this. I had a very cute couple, adorable. They were newlyweds. They came to see me at my home. So I was on the phone when they arrived at the house, and my wife invited them into the house. And she said to them, "My husband's on the phone, he'll be with you shortly." And she took them into our kitchen. She gave them a seat, gave them something to drink, and then she closed the sliding wood door that separated our kitchen from the rest of the house, so they would have privacy. My wife came, she got me. I got off the phone right away. I came over to the door, and as I always do before I walk in a room, I knocked. Then I slid the door open, and they must not have heard me knock or slide the door open, because when I came in, I'll just say they were busy. And so I didn't want to embarrass them, so I quietly slid the door closed again, yeah, and then I gave better notice that I was coming in, right, slid the door open. Now they had moved into 2 chairs, which was a very good sign, yeah, and I came and I sat down in front of them, and I said to them, "How can I help you?" So they say to me, "Well, we came for some advice about being married." So I said, "Listen, to be honest, I think your marriage is doing just fine." I said, "Maybe you could give me some pointers, actually, So so they said, no, we know, but we're just getting started. We thought it's always good to have more wisdom, so maybe we could get some wisdom from you about how to be married. Like, can you give us any advice? So what I did was, usually my appointments are very short, and in order to get a lot done in a very short period of time, I developed a series of diagnostic questions, which in a very short period of time, you can find out a lot about what's happening inside of somebody. So with relationships, often the diagnostic question that I'll ask is, the initial diagnostic questions I'll say, tell me something, do you think your spouse loves you? Okay, and that's what I asked them. And he looked at her and said, oh yeah. And she looked at him and said, oh yeah. So I said, tell me something. What makes you think that your spouse loves you? So this is where you get very interesting information. And he was very caught off guard. He was feeling very defensive. And he said, when I come home at night and I open the door and I walk in, sometimes she's standing in the living room. And when she looks up, she smiles. I said, that's it? So he's feeling very threatened. So he said, no, sometimes she makes me a cup of tea. So I said, that's it, a smile and a cup of tea? That's how you know your wife loves you? I turned to her and I said, what makes you think that he loves you? So she starts to think, and then she starts to laugh. So I said, what? She's laughing. I said, what? She said, this morning, when he left for work, he left a note on the refrigerator. It only had 3 words. So I didn't ask her what the 3 words were. Right? I'm not sure that it makes a difference. But come on, are you telling me that a relationship rises or falls based on a smile and a cup of tea and a little note with 3 words? And I will tell you, now after many years of marriage counseling, decades, yeah. And I'll explain to you why. If I remember that today is my wife's 25th anniversary, that doesn't mean that I love her. That's the giant pink elephant standing in the middle of the room. How can you miss that one? Of course, if a guy forgets the 25th anniversary, he should be shot. Yeah? But the fact that I remember my wife's 25th anniversary, that doesn't mean that I love her, because how could you miss that? But if I remember, it was 25 years ago, and I remember when I took her out, I remember we were having dinner, and I asked, what's your favorite food? And she said salmon, and she ordered the salmon that night. And then I remember we were talking, and she told me that she loves flowers, and her favorite flower are roses, and she loves yellow roses, not red. She loves yellow roses. And she likes a lot of that white poof stuff that they put in the top, yeah? And she likes a lavender ribbon. And on our 25th anniversary, I surprise her and I take her out. And when we arrive at the restaurant, the maitre d' is waiting, and he seats us at this little table. And immediately, a waitress comes over with the yellow roses, with a lot of the white poof stuff in the top, and the lavender ribbon. And then without even asking us what we want for the evening, they bring the salmon. Okay. If I do that, it means I love her. Because otherwise, why would I have remembered all those little details? It turns out all relationships rise, or God forbid, crash, based on how attentive somebody is to tiny, little, itsy, tiny details. Okay, now, I have a number of bestsellers out. However, I have an idea for a book which, if I could write it, would outsell any of my other books. I just don't have time to do it, so I will tell you the idea. You're all literate people. You write the book, just give me the money, okay? Here's the idea for the book. It will be a bestseller. There's nothing like it out there. It is a literally self-help book for relationships. Self-help, literally self-help. How does it work? You buy the book, and the book has got dozens, right? Hundreds of exercises that force a person to tune in to tiny little itsy-bitsy details. It'll have 3, 4, 5, 613 of these exercises. Yeah, don't bother writing the book. It's already been written. Yeah. That's why there are 613 categories of Jewish law that rabbi with the long white beard told me that night, with tiny little bitty itsy details in every single one of those categories. Because the Torah is trying to craft a personality that will be expert in intimacy. And if you want to succeed in a relationship, you have to be tuned into tiny little bits, little tiny details. But why do you have to say the words? So over the years, I developed an interest in psychology. I actually had such an interest when I was in university. I pursued it. And I became especially interested in the psychology of sex differences. And in the psychology of sex differences, there's a subspecialty where people concentrate on the use of language in an industrial environment. That is, the way that men use language versus the way that women use language in industrial environments. And it can cause all sorts of problems if you have a man and a woman at work and they're speaking to each other and they do not understand each other at all because of psychological sex differences. So there are lots of general features that distinguish male language from feminine language, but I'll give you one example of a global feature. That is, generally, men tend to speak exclusively for the sake of solving problems. If there's a problem, if something needs to be moved around in the world, if something needs to change, then a man will speak in order to effect that change. Now, this can be very frustrating for a woman. She comes home from work and she says, I had such an exciting day, this and this and this and this happened. How was your day? And he says, good. And she says, and then this happened, and anything interesting happened with you? No. Right? And at a certain point, she wants to grab him by the collar and shake him and say, talk to me! Okay, now, while men tend to speak, there's a gray scale, but men tend to speak when a problem needs to be solved. Women will speak even if there's no problem that needs to be solved. Watch this. I'm speaking to a group of ladies here. Have any of you ever been involved in a conversation with another woman, and that woman during the conversation told you the exact same detail twice in the conversation? Ever 3 times? Ever see 2 women walking down the street and they're both talking simultaneously? Okay, now what is going on here? They're not trying to communicate? So they are, but there's something deeper happening as well. What's that? Women are more aware of their position in what I would call love space. That is, a woman is very, very sensitive to movement into a relationship or out of a relationship. And if she's drawing closer to somebody, she can detect minor, microscopic changes in the closeness in that relationship. Now, women can do this from the time that they are little girls. And the net effect is that from the time that you were a little girl, you became intuitively aware of certain things that you can do which create closeness. Okay. One of those things is you discovered that the more that you give to somebody, the more that you sacrifice for them, the more emotionally involved you become with them. And if you give them something that's especially precious, like you share yourself with somebody, that will turn your emotions upside down. If you open yourself up and you share what's happening inside of you, that creates extraordinary emotional closeness. That is an emotional rocket. It moves you through love space at light speed. Therefore, when a woman wants to feel close to another woman, she intuitively senses that if she will speak to her, if she will open up, if she will tell her her secrets about her life, about what's going on inside of her, how she's feeling, she will feel very close to that woman that she's speaking to. Now, it's also nice when someone talks to you, but the more that you open up and share with another woman, the more close that you feel to that woman or man. By the way, this can also be very frustrating for a woman because she opens up and she shares with her husband, and her husband sometimes receives, he's sometimes distracted because he's trying to watch a television show while you're speaking to him. But at a certain point, you turn to him and you say to him, why don't you share with me like I share with you? And the feeling that you'll have is, if you're not sharing that way with me, then you're not falling in love with me like I'm falling in love with you. Within the world of Torah, within the world of Judaism, there is also a masculine sort of speech and a feminine sort of speech, a functional sort of speech that's problem solving, and a type of speech that is purely relational. The functional sort of speech are things like when you make a blessing on an apple. These Orthodox Jews believe the apple doesn't belong to us, it belongs to God. And if I would like to eat that apple, I've somehow got to get possession of that apple. So the way I get possession of it is I just ask, may I please have the apple? Borei pri ha'etz? And then afterwards, thank you very much, Bor nefashos rabos. There's blessings before and after food. That's please and thank you. It's very functional. Okay. That's masculine speech. There is a moment of pure, unadulterated feminine speech in an Orthodox Jew's life, in every Orthodox Jew's life. How did I discover it? The rabbi with the long white beard, he had a little class for people who were training how to be good husbands. There was a small group of us, and we used to come once a week, and he used to say the craziest, most counterintuitive things. When I would listen to him, I would say, that's ridiculous, right? I would go home, right? I would practice the exercise that he gave us. At the end of the week, my wife would say, go back, learn more, yeah, right? So my wife loved the class. I thought it was crazy, yeah. Fine. One night, I'm in this class, and the rabbi tells us, if you don't spend private time, that is, no cell phones, no other friends there, no other people, right? Complete and utter privacy with your spouse, uninterrupted, 2 to 3 times a week, your relationship is headed for a crash. You've got to spend at least that amount of time. So this bothered me very much, what he said, because it's so obvious. Like, even I knew that. So if I knew that, it couldn't be I understood what he was talking about. So after the class, I walked up to him and I said, Rabbi, you told us we should spend private time with our spouses. What did you mean? And I remember he looked at me like, wow, you're a bigger idiot than I thought. So I said, no, I understand what you think. I mean, what I think private time is. I want to know what you think private time is. What do you think it looks like? So he said to me, Kelemen, tell me something. You ever take your wife to a restaurant? So I said, yes, sometimes. He says, the next time you take your wife to a restaurant, mind you, at this point I was teaching in Jerusalem, and I had literally thousands of students here in Jerusalem. He said, the next time you take your wife to a restaurant, find a restaurant where there are none of your students. He said, have the maitre d' set up a little table where you'll sit right across from each other. And he said, throughout the evening, you should whisper. So I said, why? So he said, don't you feel how small the room becomes when you whisper? So I said, yeah. Okay, I tried this, yeah, right? The whole thing, right? I found a restaurant, I made sure there were going to be no Neve students there that day, yes, right? Got the table in the back, sitting right across from each other like he had said. I took her out, we whispered, right? Okay. Woo-ha! Okay, don't try this unless you're married, yes? It's extremely effective. Okay, now, the next day I come back and I say to the rabbi, where did you get that? Right? I figured like he must be reading psychology books in the bathroom. So he says to me, I got it from the Code of Jewish Law. So I said, where? Laws of dating? So he says, no, I'll show you. And he pulls off the shelf the Code of Jewish Law and opens it up to the laws of prayer. And he says, look, it says right here. It says, when you want a private moment with someone you love very, very much, take 3 steps back from the whole world. Go find a restaurant where there's none of your students. He says, then sit at a table right across from her. And throughout the evening, you should whisper. He said, why do you whisper? How loud would you speak if you knew that her ear was right next to your mouth? And why do you have to speak? Because he said, the more that you open up, the more that you say what's happening inside of you, the more you fall in love. The Almighty Master of the universe, he said, is head over heels in love with you. And he just wants you to join him in that relationship. And the hottest organ of intimacy in the entire human body is right here, he said. It's the mouth and the lips. He called this the Makshir Kesher, which in modern Hebrew means a communications device, but literally means a device for hooking up. It's the way that you create connection with somebody. It's the way that you create closeness with somebody. And the more that you talk, the closer that you get. Why do you have to say the words? He knows what's in your heart. He just wants you to fall in love. And the only way to fall in love is by talking, by opening up and sharing what's happening inside of you. Why such an obsession with details? Because the finest lovers on planet Earth are people who have trained themselves to be tuned into little tiny itsy bitsy details. And why do you have to say the words? Because it's the only way to fall in love. But what was that crazy rabbi thinking when he said to me, we do it even if we don't understand it? Didn't he realize I was going to lose total respect for him in that moment? So very personally, I married Chana. She's the youngest of 4 children. My father-in-law, when he was 16 years old, was abandoned by his parents in Berlin in 1939. His parents left him, they could get out, he couldn't get out, and they left him there. And for 2 years, he hid out until finally, in 1941, he grabbed the hold of the back of a train, and he took this train all the way across to Siberia. He made his way down he made his way to Vladivostok, then he made his way all the way down to Kobe in Japan. He caught a boat, made it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and he ended up in California. When he got to California, he was picked up immediately by the federal government as a German national in the middle of the United States in the middle of World War II. And they took this kid and they told him that you have 2 choices. You can either spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison here in the United States of America, or if you'd like, you can train as a spy and an interrogator and go back in and work for us. And when he was 18 years old, they put him on a plane and they pushed him out over Germany. And my father-in-law fell back into Berlin again and started working for the American government as a spy and an interrogator. He stayed in Germany from 1943 all the way through to 1946. My father-in-law was one of the team that interrogated all the Nuremberg criminals. All the people who were sent to the Nuremberg war crimes trials, he interrogated all of them. He saw terrible, terrible things. He was the one who chose the Nazis who were going to go back into power and take over Germany again after the war. And he said, we put Nazis back into power because there was nobody else. It was a terrible, terrible nightmare. And in 1946, when he finally got out of Germany, the American government welcomed him home. They gave him American citizenship. And he said that I'm never going back there again, and I'm going to build a better life for myself. And he wanted something wholesome and good for his children. He met a lady in California. He married her. They had a little boy. That little boy, they looked for something good for him. They discovered something called Boy Scouts, and they put him into Boy Scouting, which was be honest, be thrifty, leave the place cleaner than you found it. It had beautiful ethics, right? And my father-in-law fell in love with Boy Scouting, and my father-in-law became the Boy Scout troop leader. Then, a few years later, my father-in-law had another little boy. And when he had that other little boy, my father-in-law, when he was old enough, put him into Boy Scouting. And my father-in-law, by then, had become the head of all of Boy Scouting in Los Angeles. A few years later, he had another boy. That boy was also enrolled in Boy Scouting, the third boy. And by then, my father-in-law was head of all of Boy Scouting in California. They thought that was the last child they were going to have. Then came a surprise. And when Hannah was born, it was a little girl, he wasn't sure what to do with her. So when she came of age, he made her a Girl Scout. And while the boys were off doing cross-country bike trips and survival training, she was selling cookies. So she came to my father-in-law, who was a very honest person, and she said, Daddy, it's not fair. And he recognized it wasn't fair. And he said, listen, put on a pair of blue jeans, t-shirt, tuck your hair up into a hat, don't tell anybody you're a girl, you're a Boy Scout. Okay, and my wife became a Boy Scout, and she did the whole thing, yeah? All the way up, the survival training, the Eagle Scout, like you can take my wife, drop her in a forest with a pocket knife, and she'll survive for a week. Okay, now what I discovered was there are advantages and disadvantages in marrying a Boy Scout. Okay, an advantage of marrying a Boy Scout is they don't need very much. When I married my wife, like she really didn't need anything. At the time, I had a very successful business running. I was in the sound and lighting business, and I was making money hand over fist in America. And I would say to her, like, I want to buy you something. What do you want? You want jewelry? You want perfume? Whatever you want, I'll buy you. I have cash in pocket. And she would say, no, I just want to be with you. And I'd say, no, really, I'm serious. I want to buy you something. No, I just want to be with you. And it would make me crazy, yeah? An advantage of marrying a Boy Scout is they don't need very much, but a disadvantage of marrying a Boy Scout is they don't need very much. Okay, now, Hannah doesn't like a lot of physical things. She's not into that. But over the years, I've discovered a few things that I can actually go and purchase in a store and it will make her giggle. For example, Hannah doesn't like chocolate. Hannah likes carob. Okay, I think carob tastes like tree bark, but she likes carob, yes? Hannah likes yellow roses with a lot of the white poof stuff in the top and a lavender ribbon. One day, I was teaching here at Neve. I used to have a class. I would give an entire year, 40 weeks, on intimacy, on how to have relationships, how to get close to somebody. And I'm here in the building teaching on this topic, and there's a knock on the door, and Hadassah, the secretary from downstairs, comes and she interrupts. She had never interrupted my class before. She said, "I'm so sorry." She said, "You have this urgent message from your wife." So I took the note, and that day I was giving a whole class about giving into irrational requests. There's a widespread belief, I don't know exactly where it comes from. People in the secular world believe that if somebody asks you for something which is irrational, your lover asks you for something which is irrational, you shouldn't give in, because if you give in, you're giving in to insanity. Okay. Now, this is so wrong. A human being is not a cerebrum. Yeah? There's a whole human being, emotions, feelings, psychology going on inside of a person. And sometimes people have needs that are not rationally explicable. So I was explaining in the class that we give in to irrational requests as long as they're not destructive or self-destructive. Okay. In the middle of this, I get the note, I open it up, and it says, "Labe, on the way home, could you please double underline pick up 2 bags of seaweed?" So I fold up the note, stick it in my pocket, right? Finish giving my class on giving into irrational requests, yeah? Walk down the hallway, get my valise, I'm walking out of the building. And as I'm walking out of the building, I start to think, if a man knew nothing about relationships, and he got a note like that from his wife, how would he respond? And I picture myself saying, she didn't say why she wants the seaweed. Then I picture myself calling her, she didn't answer the phone. She won't tell me to know why she wants the seaweed. She doesn't answer the phone. I'm not going to buy it for her. Okay, now, if a man responds like that, the problem is not that Hannah forgot to say why she wanted the seaweed. The problem is the man knows nothing about relationships. Okay, what actually happened? I walked down the driveway of Neve, and I'm thinking, where on earth am I going to get some seaweed? And I walk into the local makolet, and I ask the guy if he's got seaweed, and he, of course, just laughs at me, right? And then he says, no, you got to go to a health food store. And at the time, there was no health food store here in Har Nof, and so I had to travel all the way into the center of town. Now, you got to picture the scene. I'm on the bus, and I'm head over heels in love with this lady, and the only thing I'm thinking is, cool, Hannah likes seaweed. Yeah, right? Like, I was so excited, I was jazzed, right? I get down, I walk into the health food store, and I say to the guy, can I have a couple bags of seaweed? And he looks at me and he says, oh. So I said, what's up? So he says, we just sold our last 2 bags. At which point I said, ah. So he said, but don't worry. He says, a block from here, there's another health food store. If you go over there, I said, could you call, please? He says, yeah, just a minute. He the phone, yeah. I got a guy here who wants 2 bags of seaweed. Ask him if he'll hold it for me. Yeah, he wants to know, will you hold it for him? Great, yeah. Okay, I'll tell him. No, he's gone, never mind. Okay, right? I was barreling down the street at this point. And you have to picture that I'm sprinting down Yaffa Street, yeah? And as I'm sprinting down the Yaffa Street, the only thing going through is, cool, Hannah likes seaweed, yeah! Like, I'm running into the health food store. I said, I'm the seaweed guy. He says, calm down. I said, he puts the 2 bags of seaweed on the table. He said, want anything else? I said, no, that's, oh, look at that, yeah. He's got sitting on the table a bunch of trays of Care bars. And I said, you know what? I'll take 3 of these, and I'll take 3 of these, and I'll take 3 of these, and 3 of these, and 3 of these. He puts it all in a bag, ties it up, gives me, you want anything else? No, that'll do it. I pay, I get the change, I walk out. I'm walking down the street. As I'm walking down the street, I realize I just passed the flower store. I go back to the flower store, I walk in. When I walk, I say, no, not red, yellow roses. Yeah, no, a lot of the white poof stuff. Yeah, no, not pink, lavender ribbon. I get on the bus, I make it all the way back to my house. When I get back to my house, Han opens the door, and I said, hi. Now, why did I do that? She never told me why she wanted the seaweed. And this is the crucial point. It is not that I don't care why Hannah wants the seaweed. Because when you love somebody, you want to crawl around inside of their head and discover everything about them. So I want to know why Hannah wants the seaweed. But I'm not going to refuse to buy it for her until she can justify it to me. If Hannah says she wants it, that's enough for me. When that rabbi said to me, Lev, we do it even if we don't understand it. It's not that he forgot that I was Harvard and UCLA educated. It's that he thought that even though I had been to Harvard and UCLA, maybe I might still have a heart left. was talking to me about relationships and I was thinking about religion. Why such an obsession with detail? Because if you are going to become expert at relationships, you have got to practice a lot of exercises all day, every day, forcing you to focus in on little tiny itsy bitsy little details. And why do you have to say the words? Because if you don't say the words, you will never fall in love. And why is it that now I do it even if I don't understand it? And the answer is because I'm not involved in religion. I'm involved in a relationship. I'm in the middle of falling in love. And that's how you fall in love. Okay, now, the reason I decided to explain this to you today is because when you trip into a foreign culture like this, everything seems disconnected. Nothing seems to have a connecting line. There's no rhyme or reason. And what I just did was I took a jigsaw puzzle with 10,000 pieces and I assembled for you the frame. Everything will fit into the framework that I delivered to you during the last hour. Now, when you go out there and you start hearing different bits and pieces of Torah, go ahead and take those jigsaw puzzles, just place them inside and create the most beautiful tapestry that you will ever see ever in your life. Thank you very much.